Okay, so I spoke last year, and I joked that I was a former Best Buy employee, but from Mattel Electronics. Also, when I spoke at VCF SoCal, I got really choked up, so that's why I have something sweet to kind of take care of the back of my throat. Full disclosure, about 10 years ago, I had a full uvulectomy because my uvula was dragging, terrible thing, so they actually lasered it off. It was very cool, but I get dried out better, so we're gonna have this at hand. So, I call myself an Aquarius evangelist in the spirit of Guy Kawasaki, who was kind of the OG Apple Macintosh evangelist from the 90s. So my goals today is I'm going to give a brief history of the Z80, talk about its ancestors, chipwise, and the creators of this 48-year-old CPU. Then I'm going to talk about the computers, arcade games, and other devices that actually use the Z80. We'll talk about the end of life, that's what EOL stands for, effects on the variety of users that use devices or program for the Z80. We'll offer some other options on where we can go from here, depending on what your involvement is with one of these devices. And then we'll use the Aquarius Plus, which I've been working on for 2 years now, as a use case for what we've done to get past all of this. The Aquarius Plus is a Z80-based system that reimagined what the Aquarius computer from Mattel Electronics, which was only out for 3 or 4 months in 1983-84, we reimagined what it would have been like if it hadn't got caught up in the computer crash of 83-84, which basically took Mattel Electronics off the map. Mattel didn't do electronics. It wasn't really the Aquarius that did it. It was really kind of over investment in the Intellivision platform. So they said you can either get out of the electronics business or you can get out of business. And they said, Barbies it is. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm a team developer for the Ventura County Fire Department. We develop iOS apps, but we also implement software as a service apps that the firefighters and the chiefs and the administrative staff use. Also, until recently, I taught at California Lutheran University. I'm taking a break from that because grad students. And I've, again, for the past couple of years, been on the Aquarius Plus development team. It's a completely open source project. Anybody's welcome to join. It's a fun system. Since Mattel basically gave up on it, so did everybody else. So the IP there is completely open source. I went to Cal Arts, that's where I met my wife. I got both of my degrees at Cal Lutheran back in the day. At CLU when I teach software engineering, AI, data structures, those sorts of things. We talked a little bit about the Aquarius Plus and my work on that. I also work with Perifractic on the VIC-2 squared board, which is now kind of obsolete for some of the stuff we'll talk about today. And I've done a lot of Aquarius upgrades. I also do some arcade game repairs. For my family, which I don't have on here, my wife is an independent college counselor. She used to be in the entertainment industry. My oldest is a deputy DA in Orange County, California. My son's a digital cinematographer. He's worked for Blizzard, Microsoft on Forza 5 and those sorts of things. And he was caught up in the whole layoff. The layoffs that have been happening is really rough in the game industry right now. And my youngest just got their graduate degree from San Francisco State up here in Daly City, and they're going to be doing their own teaching credentials. So the news hit me, I believe it was back in early March or so, came across my feed. This is a paraphrase of that output that Littlefuse, aka Zilog, put out. On April 15th, they're going to stop manufacturing all forms of the Z80 processor, and then the June 14th deadline, which of course has gone and passed. And there were about 13 variants of it, which we'll talk about later. So, what does that mean? Well, as my badge says, it's a meteoric event, and we've got some of my favorite Z80-based systems, of course, the Aquarius, the Sinclair TRS-80, a couple game systems, Coleco, Master System. So who's going to save us from all of this? Is there some sort of a Z80 digital messiah that we can rely on? No, there's probably not. So let's jump into the Wayback Machine, and let's take a look at the development of the Z80. When we talk about the father of the Z80, not necessarily the father of the microprocessor, but without a doubt, it is conceded to be Federico Faggin. He was born in Vicenza, Italy. He grew up in a very intellectual family. Again, this was post-World War II, so they had just kind of gotten out of the grips of that. He had a very strong interest in technology from an early age, which of course we all like to promote in the young people around us, family, friends, those sorts of things. He attended a technical high school in Vicenza, and he later earned his degree from the University of Padua in physics, and he graduated summa cum laude. He joined Olivetti, which is, of course, the typewriter company, Italian technology company, when he was just 19. And he led the implementation of a small digital transistor computer, again, the Programmer 101, which only had 4K and like 12-bit magnetic memory in, and this was 1960. Later, he joined SGS Fairchild. SGS is the Italian company, and then they were acquired by Fairchild. And so he worked at the Italy facilities. He worked on the silicon gate technology, particularly MOSFETs, in the late 60s. Silicon gate technology, as we learned, became a almost 5-speed increase over the earlier aluminum gate technology. He also worked on the 3708 multiplexer, and it was indeed 5 times faster than its predecessor, the 3705. Next, he went to, so I'm scrolling up on my notes a little bit. After Fairchild, he saw that they weren't making full use of that SGT technology, so he went to Intel. He had emigrated to the United States through Fairchild, was here in the Bay Area. And so he developed a methodology for creating shadow masks, and that's how, in those days, you would create silicon chips. You would create photo etched, and you would reduce it down through several camera angles, photo etch it, that sort of a thing. And he was important in working on the MCS4 family, which included the 4004 or the 4004, depending on how you like to say it, which was the first single chip microprocessor. And then, of course, the 8008, which was the first 8-bit processor, very early 70s. And then he moved on to the 4040 and 8080 as well, too. But he didn't feel like Intel was really promoting this for the way it could be, really trying to sell this microprocessor. In those days, they wanted to sell RAM. They wanted to sell those components because it was much more lucrative to do that. So he and some of his very talented friends formed a company called Zilog, particularly with Ralph Ungerman. And then in 1976, they released our favorite Z80, and it was engineered by Masatoshi Shima. Later on, after this, Faggin went on to found Synaptics. If you've got a touchpad, iPhone, anything like that, you've used some of their technology. All right, so there's no Ancestry.com or 23andMe for silicon, but maybe 24-bit in me. So if we talk about the genealogy of how the Z80 got here, remember we said we had the 4004, which gave way to the 8008, and then the 4040, 8080, and from there, and there are a couple of chips in this progression, but I'm kind of cutting to the chase. We went to the 8086, which is the basis of what most of the systems that a lot of us use these days are, the x86 and, of course, the 64-bit platform that the other group did. Okay, so within Zilog, their first product was the Z80. But Zilog knew that they couldn't ramp up manufacturing quickly enough, so they went to their buddies, of all people, MOSTech, because MOSTech was already up and running. They had done a similar thing with the 6502 class of chips, with those guys having left Motorola, so there's kind of an interesting parallel there. And they were all buddies. So we had a couple of chips that were out there, and these were all licensed. The MK3880 was a MOSTech chip, so that during late 75, early 76, Zilog could meet the orders, and they were rolling in. But NEC decided, hey, this is a cool little chip. I think we can make it cheaper. So without licensing it, they decided to develop this I've seen it both as the micro PD78OC and as the UPD78OC, but it's an unauthorized clone. Fujin and Shima actually buried several transistors and several gates beneath traces to kind of subvert copies, and that actually delayed NEC by almost 2 years just because they were very clever about how they hid some of those gates. From there, from the Z80, we go to the Z180, which has a clock generator, 16-bit timers and counters. Sorry, I lost my track. Wait state generators, those sorts of things. And it also has direct memory access built into it, which the Z80 needed some helper chips to go along with that. There was also the Z280. It was kind of a direct descendant of Z80, but also took on some of the 180s. Not a very popular chip, nor was the Z380, which was really more geared towards telecom equipment. So what is the current thing that Z80 is promoting? Well, it's the EZ80. And yes, it is Z80 compatible, but it's really a system on a chip. It has a little Z80 core in there, but it's got all of these other things. It's got 32-bit architecture in it. It's a great chip, but it's not really a Z80. It's kind of some of the other stuff we're going to talk about. And again, around that time, Little Fuse also purchased Zilog. But this is just hardware. We have some other paths forward that kind of share this genealogy. When we talk about open source cores that can be put in FPGAs, we've got T80, which has been around for a long time. It's written in VHDL, which is one of 2 virtual hardware definition languages that exist. The other is Verilog. So about 2 years later, another group of people took that T80 core and rewrote it in Verilog. Okay, so the most common footprints, and these have been produced up until June of this year, or till April or May of this year. So we've got the beloved DIP40 package, which through '76 through the early 2000s was the predominant chip that people would put in their devices, whether they were selling replacements for old TI systems that broke or whatever. This was the chip that people know and love. But then in the early 2000s, the chip version that I use, the QFP44, which has 44 pins on it, became more prevalent, along with a plastic carrier. And this is really more like a socket-based chip, so it's easier to put in and out of a board. The PLCC doesn't require any soldering, so you just, again, slip one in. Okay, so the Z80 was used in hundreds of product lines, including the clone versions themselves, which there are thousands of products. Texas Instruments, in fact, used a clone version, licensed clone version of the Z80 for many years in their TI calculators. It's safe to say that there are millions of those devices out in the world, probably millions more in landfill. Hopefully, recycling centers are in the for sale room here. So let's see. Give me a quick show of hands if you have owned one of these systems or if you've actively used. Yeah. So take a quick glance. Anybody notice, have I missed anything important? I know one of my peers talked about the Mimotech MTX, but that really kind of didn't make the cut for this. There's only so much I can put on here. Yeah, we do. We do handle that in just a second. So these are embedded and add-on devices. I thought I had the Genesis on here. Genesis, okay, so Genesis is interesting because it's an add-on device. The Genesis had one in it, but that wasn't its main CPU. It was for compatibility of the old Master System games. So here's that one, to your point, so thank you for that. And of course, lots of TI calculators. The TI calculator numbering I've never understood because the 81 was released in 1990, and the 73 was in 98, so it's not like they're following a naming convention or anything like that. For these cartridges here, the CPM64 cartridge, the Commodore 128, Franklin Ace, and this Microsoft Z80 card for the Apple II, that was primarily so if people wanted to run CPM, they could. So they would keep the other, in this case, most of these were 6502s, they would keep them in a wait state and then just run the Z80 as the primary processor. And then my favorite list. This is a list of only 75 out of about of hundreds and hundreds of games. The ones here in bold are the ones that commonly come up as the most beloved arcade games out there. I tend to like more puzzle, more story-driven games, Arabian, Bagman, Blueprint. My favorite game of all time is, I only show it as Higamaru here, but it's actually Pirate Ship Higamaru. It's kind of like Pango, but it's a very cute little game. I also like the games from Williams, kind of the 83, 84 games, because the graphics just look great, and it's just crazy gameplay. If you've ever seen the Wacko cabinet, it's actually at a little bit of an angle. It's kind of fun to play with. Okay, so we've talked about the system and kind of what its hardware legacy. What do we do as users? We've established there are probably more Z80 devices out there that can be counted. So let's focus on the people who use these systems. Now, in my day job, one of the current tropes that we use is what's known as a persona, particularly when you're dealing with websites. And what persona is a person taking on? Let's say you went to the Vintage Computer Federation website. You might be engaging that website as the persona of someone wanting to buy tickets to this or one of the other events. Or you might be taking on the persona of a donor who wants to contribute to the organization. These personas are collections of use cases that kind of identify a role. And use cases can be shared. A login is a login, no matter what it is you're trying to do. So back in February at VCF SoCal, and if you get a chance to go next year for the second year, I recommend. It's a great event. It's not held at a great institute like this, but it's a lot of fun. One of my buddies, Randy Kindig, came up with categories of vintage computer enthusiasts. He talked about how there are purists, people who like emulation, and then there's kind of the people in the middle. Their attributes are that purists love original hardware and think it a sin to put anything other than original hardware back in. Yeah, try and source some of that stuff that's older than 30 years old. Emulators do like the old machines, but they don't have the resources to purchase, operate, or maintain them. Most of us don't, or our wives don't let us. Or you got a mixture. People who are a little bit malleable. I kind of put myself into that arena as well, too. So that's where Randy left it. I took it one step further, and how would the loss of a Z80, the end of life of the Z80, how would that affect us? Well, as I said, there's often a strong bias of the purists, particularly folks who are avid collectors for original hardware and original components. One reason that I got out of doing as much video game repair is because not only are they very much purists, they also kind of have a bro mentality that's not a lot of fun for those of us who really like to program stuff and get under the wire. They want to get that high score, so I kind of backed off on that. Purists are going to want those original components, but they know that they're going to have to source those. We've got some ways that they can do that. Emulation folks generally aren't affected by that, whether they're running MAME or one of the emulators for a specific system. Great. The more flexible a person is, the more open they are to alternate options to those, which we'll talk about in a bit. So I took Randy's and I went one step further. I went to what I call personas of vintage computer enthusiasts. I talk about the users, the collectors, developers, and engineers. High-level use case for these guys is a user obviously uses original hardware or an emulator or both, particularly for enjoyment. It's not their daily grinding machine. Collectors collect original hardware and software. Developers create new software for legacy systems. And of course, engineers design new hardware or add-ons for modern or retro systems. So how would the loss of the Z80 affect these folks? Well, it depends on a user's desire to continue using their original hardware. If their TI-99-4A isn't working anymore, there's an emulator for that. It'll probably, if they have to have that itch to scratch, they will probably use the emulator. Or maybe they'll pony up. Maybe they'll find somebody who can fix it for them or find a replacement board. Collectors will probably stockpile Z80 chips, and I get that. It makes perfect sense. I repair old Aquariuses. I do have a bunch of Z80s hanging around, in case I need to do that. Developers, they're generally unaffected by this. Again, unless a new CPU is used, if we go to an EZ80, there's a lot of pipelining they could take advantage of in the new instruction sets. Engineers are going to try to virtualize components so that they can improve the makeability, the manufacturing of these. So, quick survey, which of these is better? First one is the arcade one-up Atari Star Wars. The next one is the original Atari Star Wars. The arcade one-up has 3 games in it, Star Wars, Empire, which are both vector-based games, but it also has Return of the Jedi, which is a raster-based game. It costs about $600 if you get it with a little riser stand. Only weighs about 92 pounds. Only 14 cubic feet. It draws nothing, power-wise, and requires almost no service. Audience is obviously for users. Whereas this cabinet, which is in far lesser supply, you'd be lucky now if you can get one for $6,000. They're very expensive, particularly if the raster screen is working properly. It is clearly for collectors. And of course, back in the day, it was for operators, people who ran arcades and stuff like that. So the answer is they're both great solutions for the right type of persona. So full disclosure, I do own one of these. I've had it for about 10 years because it's got some personal meaning to me. It was kind of like the first arcade game that my male role model when I was growing up took me out to an arcade and we played that. So I love this game. However, I do think that if this one had come out first, this one came out about 4 years ago, I probably would have bought it. It's smaller. I can't tell you how many times I've had to repair this. Unfortunately, I'm capable of doing that. So I guess I'm a collector to a degree. Okay, now this is more direct interaction. So we're talking about screen time. So hardware only. Everybody start with your hands raised if you can, and we're going to slowly drop them as I whittle people down. So lower your hand if you spend most of your time interacting with a mobile device. Well, good for you. Awesome. Okay. Windows-based system. Okay, I figured that'll. Mac OS. Few less. Linux. I knew I'd get you guys. All right. Or if you're just a total gamer and when you do spend screen time, it's going to be on a game system. I think we have no hands left. Nobody's spending time on a retro game system for most of their work. It's just not practical. And that tracks based on the hands that I saw with what the typical breakdown is for where most people are spending their screen time. So what can we make of that? Most of the time, we're all users of probably a more modern system. Very few of us, with the exception of this crowd, because of where we are today, are collectors. Some of us are developers. We like to develop new software, even if it's a script-based system. It's perfectly fine. But not enough of us are engineers. We need more engineers out there. So let's fit that into our use cases. What tools are these users using? Well, most of us are using social media, email, browsers, all that sort of stuff. Collectors, a lot of the same, but obviously they're going to be going through eBay, computer fairs like this, swap meets to get parts or get new things. Developers are going to be using IDE, Visual Studio, Code or Collect or DevOps or whatever. And they're going to be using graphics tools. I don't really discern between coders and artists, in terms of developing software, because both are important. Engineers are also going to be using a lot of these tools, but they're going to be using either Verilog or VHDL tools, some design tools like Fusion 360 or OpenCAD, PCB development tools, KiCad or others, and then working with manufacturers with their PCB manufacturing tools. So this is the slide that I gave last year that Jeffrey mentioned. This is my personal journey of how I've avoided and obeyed Moore's Law. I typed my code out in the early 70s because I didn't have a computer. That didn't change until '84 when I got my Aquarius computer at KB Toys and Hobby. Went to a C64, Mac SE, a bunch of Macs. I jumped ship from Mac OS in '99 because Steve Jobs killed the developer program. That was really what it was, and I couldn't get cheap Macs anymore. Windows, Win 7, Win 9, 10, and then, of course, Win 11 now with a smattering of Linux here and there that I've done. So the last time I used, every day, a Z80-based system was in 1985. I just haven't used one. Bless you. Not even when I was going through calculus or any of that with a TI-99 or something like that. I didn't really use it that often. So let's take a look at why. The difference between computers in '84 and a difference in most computers today. To make a similarity with this, my first car that I bought with my own money was a Ford 66 Mustang. It was about 18 years old, 20 years old by the time I got it. I could look on either side of the straight six engine and see pavement. I could take out the starter with 3 or 4 bolts. If you look at modern computers today, I don't even want to open this guy up. You know, have you seen any repair videos? Man, there's layers of adhesive. I don't have, my wife won't let me buy that stuff. So there has been a progression, and we know that. And as a result, repairability and upgradability on the systems that we love has suffered, whether a Z80 based or whatever. So what are our paths forward? So here are some options with dealing with the loss of the Z80. So the Z80 is dead, long live the Z80. And since there's no Z80 Messiah to save us, we'll have to work it out ourselves. So here's my options. For somebody who wants to be an engineer, or a collector, but more of an engineer, if you want to develop a supportable, manufacturable, and that's key, and sustainable system, you can consider a few things. First, collectors. They're going to try and source pile these sorts of things. Of course, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, festivals, swap meets, and other social media. Sometimes you'll find a gem in an antique store or a thrift shop. Most of the time, they're going to be in some person, maybe who's passed away's closet or something like that. That's where a lot of these wind up, or storage sheds. But the smart collectors know that you make friends with the local e-waste guy. Really, seriously. California and the federal government subsidizes e-waste recycling. These guys know when they've got some good stuff, so make friends with them. They may come across, you know, a rare Nintendo, you know, test system. In terms of sourcing parts, good parts, at least for them to be manufacturing, you have to deal with, obviously, availability. Counterfeit devices, there's a process called blacktopping. And blacktopping isn't specifically done to deceive anybody. A lot of chip manufacturers will do that. A lot of qualified and reputable refurbishers will. A good example is the Dallas real-time clock chips. They work great. They still work great. We use one in one of the Aquarius systems that I deal with, an add-on system. When you have a bunch of PCBs that are stacked on top of each other, motherboards, old AT, ATX, 386 motherboards, they tend to scratch on each other. So those Dallas chips are kind of unreadable. It looked like somebody drug them along the cement. But there's 2 or 3 millimeters of plastic on there. There's nothing wrong with them. So it is okay to rebadge that or blacktop it, put a piece of plastic on it and re-etch it or something like that. That's the right thing to do. Whenever I refurbish them, I do that. But not everybody's so good about that. As a result, you tend to overpay, particularly if you go through eBay. You have to pay attention to clock speeds. I know that when I was buying a particular set of those Dallas chips, they wouldn't work with my system because they were too slow for what the bus speed that I was hoping to use was. And hand assembly and repair is tedious. I was just talking to the guy who's doing the cap replacements over here. There's a reason he doesn't hire out, because he's doing it as a demo. It's a thankless job. You have to be able to automate for assembly purposes. So let's take a look at these footprints again. In terms of a path forward, let's say we can't find a DIP 40, which is never going to happen. They're always going to be available. They will come out of the woodwork. There are some modern options. I don't know if anybody's seen this. You can use that PLCC, slip in your own Z80, and it works pretty much the same. Again, pay attention to timings. But you also, if you want to manufacture, you need to pay attention to pick and place machines. When I manufacture my PCBs, it has to be on a tape, or GLC PCB, or PCB way won't touch it. They will charge me a manual placement and then wave soldering fee for it. QFP44s and PLC44s you can send through a device, even if it's going into a socket. DIP 40, you can't do that. It's hand placement and hand soldering. Okay. So for me, D-Day was just this past Wednesday. I got this from PCBWay. We make the Aquarius Plus open source. It's online. Anybody can go to PCBWay, pay them to manufacture it for you, and it will be done. So I responded to them, and again, they did, I think they meant model here rather than moil. That's a completely different thing in my family's religion. But again, she speaks 2 more languages than I do, so I'm glad that they reached out to me. So I know that I have to go back in and update something in that project so that it'll work. Because again, we're using that QFP44. So we talked about stockpiling parts, hardware update. So what are we gonna do? Well, from the announcement, the Zilog tells you what they want you to do, use the Z80. So is it the heir apparent? I don't know. My favorite thing on one of the forums we were talking about is, can't you just drop in an Z80 instead? I'm like, no. There is a difference in cost, and at the quantities that I'm manufacturing, a $4 price can be a $400 difference. It is 400 pins versus 40 to 44 pins, so you gotta do something with those extra pins. You gotta pull them up, pull them down, or something like that. They can't just float. There are a whole bunch of new control pins, which I won't make use of, in addition to, memory refresh and all of those pins. I'm probably not gonna use them. Much tighter pin density, so that means my PCB is probably gonna have more layers to it, which ups the manufacturing, but really it ups the complexity of being able to repair it. Power. These chips aren't using 5 volts anymore. Unless you're dealing with a system or an interface that requires that 5 volts, they're gonna be 3 volts or less on a lot of these chips. There's some onboard SRAM, which is great, but then I've gotta have headers for how I get that information into this chip. And again, timing. These are a minimum of 8 times faster than the chips that I want. So we've got lots of new features. It's basically a new system. It's not the system that I was supporting anymore. Okay, so maybe not hardware update. Let's virtualize. If Zilog can put a little core of a Z80 in their Z80, so can we. So we talked about the best open source cores, T80. It's been around since 2002. It's a very mature product. They haven't had any real updates since 2018, at least from the core team. There have been some timing updates that some people have done, but it's a very mature core. There's also the TV80, which again is in Verilog. It came about 2 years later. It's had a few more updates. So those are some options. So where do we put those? Well, we put those into an FPGA. All right. So if we didn't have a Z80, or if in the case of the Aquarius Plus, if we hold our physical Z80 in a reset state, or a wait state, we can let this T80 or TV80 do what it wants to at speeds much greater than any of the silicon that I can buy from JLC PCB or Mals or whomever. And we've already virtualized a lot of the chips anyway. Here's some of the drop-in replacements that exist. A guy, now a friend of mine, because we've been talking a lot, Andros Tantos, has a DIP40-based virtual Z80 that he's got. He's using a G1NR FPGA. You've got an MSX card for its CPU. It's using a TNC4. And then, of course, there's one for the TRS Model 80 that's on a PIC32. Now, to be fair, the TNC and the PIC32 really aren't FPGAs. They're running code. They're not running virtual hardware. So they're a little slower, but at the speeds that these systems are running, it doesn't matter. All right. So our path forward is to virtualize. I'm an engineer. I work with engineers, so we are going to virtualize. So if we talk about best-in-class modern retro FPGA systems, without a doubt, you can't have this conversation without talking about the Spectrum Next. Very popular, great system. It runs anything that you could run on the Speccy, on the 80, 81, those sorts of things. Great system. Problem is most of the time it's sold out. It's a very popular system. And 410 is translated from the pound, so you do have across the seas shipping. It's a great system. I'd warrant that the Aquarius Plus is also a best-in-class system. We're comparable. We're certainly not as advanced as they are. We haven't sold thousands of units like they have. We've sold a couple hundred or so. But we're doing basically the same things they are. Okay, so why would we do this on the Aquarius Plus? We can take a look at my talk from last year as to why, but let's talk about price to feature. So when the original Aquarius came out, the one that I bought from KB Toys, it was about 350 bucks, right? And all of the problems with it are shown over there. With the Aquarius Plus, it's technically less, more memory. You can use better controllers. You can use Wi-Fi, uses VGA, which is great. And we do have a legit Z80 on board. But we do have the ability to virtualize it, which we are in the process of doing. We also do over-the-air updates, which is great. You really cannot update that. So here's the original Aquarius PCB. There's the Z80s. Again, it's a dip in the old one, and here's our QFP on the right. General dimensions of the PCB, the Aquarius Plus, again, there's so many through-hole components on that one that I can't even count them. We have virtualized most of those big chips. The custom PLAs, which are only on the Aquarius, you can only get one by basically harvesting from another one. We've put all that into our FPGA. But to get all the full functionality, you have to add the mini expander, because it has the joystick ports, it has the sound chip. Again, we have virtualized 2 of them. Well, we one-upped it. We've also created a mini version. Not everybody needs to collect Aquarius cartridges. So we got rid of the expansion bus. We got rid of the cassette and printer ports, because most people are not using those. They're saving to the SD card. We also got rid of the joystick ports, because Bluetooth Xbox controllers are a whole lot more fun than playing with the Intellivision style controllers that the Aquarius uses. All right, what else? So what do we do to transition to a virtual Z80? Well, we do get a smaller PCB, much reduced component count. We get a flexibility in where we put components in this sort of box we can put it into. But we do lose that Z80 inside credibility that is important to a lot of retro users, a lot of the collectors particularly. Kernel sysrom modifications have to be made to tell the FPGA version of the Z80 to handle the process versus the physical one if we have one. There are some timing adjustments, particularly if you do speed increases, and you need special simulation tools to do that. And honestly, Verilog and VHDL engineers are unicorns. I know 1.5. I don't count myself among them. But we will have a virtual Z80, what we call VZ80, flexibility within a couple months here in the Aquarius Plus. So let's take the old Aquarius off the table. What does a virtual Z80 gain us? Well, we could take it down to a 3-inch by 3-inch and still have exactly the same functionality. We could, here's our production costs. So we have 146 surface mount components, 13 through-hole or manual placement components. The best I can get those sourced, landed, tariffed here in the States is about $70 a piece. Mini, better. You know, there's a reduction in the count. We get rid of the expansion bus, which it's hard to find those. You know, who thought that connectors would be the thing that we're all trying to find? And again, I can get it down to 50 through the reduced component count. Well, if I project that on this Aquarius VZ model, I can get it down to much less than that, and I can probably land these for $35 a piece or less. Again, fully assembled, ready to go. This is what the cases look like. For the original one, here's a kind of a pretty, you can come up and take a look at it afterwards. This is what an Aquarius looks like on the inside. We also have a clear case version of the Mini up front with the badges. So, going the wrong way. But who knows what a VZ, it could be an Aquarius Micro, mobile, laptop, tablet. We could even make a bread bin with a built-in key case for those folks who like those. I don't have enough desk space for bread bins, quite honestly. All right, so is it the platform of the future? Well, any Z80-based system, technically we could write another core for. In fact, the Aquarius Plus already has one for the Master system. It's called the AQMS. It runs the SMS ROM files perfectly great. It doesn't do great with memory cards because we haven't implemented it, and it's really just a proof of concept. We could do one of these. So any TRS-80 lovers out there who want to learn Verilog, I would love to have probably a TRS-80 Model 3 for backwards and then potential forward capabilities. Why couldn't we do that? We could certainly do that. Now, the Spectrum, again, Spectrum Next has already done that, so there's not a lot of need. But what if you wanted to swap out? Our FPGA is not, doesn't have any memory in it. It's loaded up from the ESP32 at boot up, so you could put whatever you wanted to on it. But remember, we're talking about a system with no Z80. Well, now we can load any core we want to. Technically, we could now, but what if we did some of these other systems? That would be really cool, because we're not tied to this. Could this be a low-cost version of the Mega 65? I don't know. The VIC-20, the PET, the Commander X16? Probably not. There's a lot more going on in there, but Our engineer is the one who designed the Vera chip for the Commander X16, so maybe somebody could tantalize him. So, speaking of our engineer, just this morning, from our little Aquarius Plus thread, I got this from Frank Vandenhoef, who's our system architect, and he is one of our unicorns that we talked about for virtual hardware. He's in Brussels. It's already late afternoon there now, probably dinner time by now, but I got this. He's designing an FPGA-based laptop. It won't be an Aquarius Plus laptop. It's going to be more flexible with that. No main CPU other than the FPGA. And again, this literally just came across the wire this morning. So this is kind of the mock-up. He's starting with the keyboard. And why do you start with the keyboard? Because that really, the screen and the keyboard dictate the form factor that you're going to be in. That tells you how much of a PCB you can work with beneath it. So there's no details on RAM ports or batteries or anything. This came in this morning. All right, so hopefully we're going to pull all this together. So what is my admonishment to users? If you're a user, a Z80 user or a user of a Z80-based system, join a community. If you want to do it on Twitch or whatever you want to do, join a community, get some fellowship among your peers. Download and try some new emulators for your favorite or maybe some other Z80-based emulators, and make your voices heard, because engineers and software developers do listen. They want to create games that people like. They like that adrenaline rush when people say, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And maybe consider becoming a developer. Most of these systems have great basic packages in them. I encourage you to do that. What about collectors? And I don't at all mean to vilify collectors at all. Like I said, I am basically one. Document your hobby. Don't sit on information. The reason that there are any PDFs out there for any of these systems, whether it's on the killer list of video games or any of these other forums, is because one of us collectors thought it was important enough to set this Xeroxed copy of something, out and about. So do that. And share your knowledge. And consider becoming an engineer. You're halfway there already if you're replacing chips. Give it a try. Developers, just write some more software, please. We're hungry. We want more goodies. We don't even care if it's a port of another Z80-based system. We had a guy port the Jetpack from the Speccy over to the Aquarius. It's great. It's a fun game. Work to improve those libraries that you write. Most of the time, 9/10 of a port from one Z80-based system to another is just reworking the addressing files that tell you where the ports are for everything. Publish your software, document your methods. Okay, last but not least, engineers. Become an engineer. Also join a community. Expand your tool set. Start using open source tools like KiCad and OpenCAD, where you can share your designs and not have to do all of the lifting yourself. One of the things that I was able to do to take the workload off of Frank was to become proficient in these tools and help him work out. If you've never seen it, go to 8bitworkshop.com. It's Stephen Hugg. He has a series of books on how to do everything from assembly coding to Verilog. It's a great tool. Learn Verilog, learn Verilog. This book came out in May, I believe it is, 30 bucks. Buy it, it's a great tool. It's in both Verilog and VHDL. And consider collaborating on a new or modern piece of hardware. Mostly, have fun. So we do have some more great talks this afternoon. One of my buddies, Marcel Urs, he had a talk yesterday, but he's going to talk specifically about KiCad this afternoon. So if you were kind of interested in maybe learning PCB design, take a look. Also, another buddy of mine, Evie Salomon, talking about how she's developed chip testers. I use one of her chip testers myself. So take a look. Right in between these two is when we're going to be giving away not one, but 2 Aquarius Pluses. Badges are 10 bucks at the check-in counter. They look like this. Each one is signed by me, front and back. It's got a unique serial number where that green thing is. We will hold the drawing at 2:45. You have to be present, and you have to have the winning badge to win. Right now, there were only 5 of these badges sold, so your chances right now are 2 in 5, so pretty good odds for 10 bucks. Minimum chances are 2 in 50. If we sell 50 of them, will be great. I will expand that, so if we do go up to the full 100, I've got some more to give away as well, too, so nobody who wants to hopefully you'll be able to do this. And if anybody decides they want to, I can talk to you afterwards about how to download the emulator. Emulator's perfectly free. I do sell these, but of course I'm not selling them here today. And all the proceeds for these go to the Vintage Computer Federation, and they are a 501c3. I'm also donating these minis. I'm not getting any money for this. So a couple of shout outs. Wife, of course, my buddy Frank, the folks on the Aquarius Plus team, Christian Simpson, Perifractic, Jan Vita for the videos that they've done on the Aquarius Plus. I do appreciate that. And then in italics, some of the folks who were important to me who have passed over the years. Here are my references. I will publish this for anybody who's interested. And here is my contact info. I will be at the fair today, obviously through the drawing this afternoon. We also have an Aquarius Plus setup over at Selim's area. We're having some problems with the keyboard for some reason, but it is what it is. All right, any questions?
All right, I'll come to you so you can speak into the microphone.
Oh, Sean, my name is Glenn. Z80 has a very special place in my heart because it was my very first processor I learned when I got a TRS-80 back in the late 70s. I remember over time reading that the Z80 was always considered a hard processor as far as hardware to interface. And I'm just curious if you ever knew why, because I would hear it said, but no one would ever go into specific details as why.
Yeah, so Curtis F. Kaler, the guy who is developing our sysrom, our kernel, he does assembly in both 6502 as well as some others, and Z80. Also, if you look online for the Retro Desk, Matt Heffernan, he does a good series. They're about a year and a half old, and talks about the key differences. Even Dave Murray, the 8-bit guy, talks about the differences between the 6502. I think it depends on how you're addressing external components, like you said, whether it's going to be direct memory mapped or whether you're going to be using the I/O pin. We find that the I/O pin on the Z80 is much more flexible for the things we want to add. It's a lot less wiring for sure. I mean, you still got to set the data and address bus to it, but it's an easier toggle. It's one of those control pins we were talking about. Technically, 6502 runs its code faster than we do. Or sorry, technically Z80 runs it faster, but we have more commands to do the same thing, whereas 6502 has some simplified commands, particularly people who are really good at that have done. So you could make the argument for both. I love both systems. Again, I was a 64 guy for a long time, so never could afford an Apple II like my buddy Selim. And again, the only reason I got the Aquarius was because it was 99 bucks at KB Toys. I didn't have a system before that, so. Yours was free. Awesome. Did that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? We're all friends here. Should we call it good? Okay.
Going once, going twice. All right. Wait, let me come to you. So it's not going to be recorded.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just was saying, making a comment that I thought it was that the Z80 had more cycles per second.
Sure. So you have to do
instruction. I mean. Yeah,
you have to do more instructions to kind of do the same thing, where there's some not shortcuts, but better constructed machine commands on the 6502 and other systems. He's got more to say.
No, the actual machine cycles is what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. From what I understand, like a immediate load for the accumulator in 6502 takes 2 cycles, and in Z80 would be like 4 or 6 or something like that.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Probably. I am not an assembly programmer. So. Are you, Sean? Okay, good. All right, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in first thing, and I'll see everybody back here at 2:45 today.